In the beginning of 2006, a coalition of lion brothers were born who will eventually change the history of Sabi Sand Game Reserve forever. Rangers and field guides called them the Mapojas. Filmmaker and field guide spent 16 years following this coalition of lion brothers, and this is their story.
The Sabi Sand Game Reserve borders the Kruger National Park. Malamala in the eastern section was the home of one of the biggest lion prides in Sabi Sand, the Sparta Pride. The 7 lionesses of the Sparta Pride were dominated by the 5 aging West Street males, and they were already past their prime. In May of 2000, a young subadult male somehow got lost and had to survive on his own. Then, in July of that same year, he latched on to the original Sparta Pride but was not accepted by most of the Pride members, seeing him as an outsider. Later, he would be called Makulu, and he was just under 2 years old at that time. However, his 5 fathers, the West Street males, somehow remembered their boy, tolerating him and allowing him to stay despite now coming of age. Makulu became an important member of the Pride and kept the Pride well fed by leading in big hunts as his fathers aged. This may have been the reason why they accepted a young male who joined up with the Sparta Pride by the mid of 2000. Shortly after his arrival, 2 lionesses gave birth, and they were not very happy with his presence in their pride. It was not easy for Makulu. But when the coalition slowly dwindled down, it was Makulu who helped the lionesses to bring down big prey. That's when the lionesses finally accepted him, and when their cubs got older, Makulu bonded with them for life. By 2002, the cubs had been grown up to subadults. The subadult males Rasta, Pretty Boy and Dreadlocks spent a lot of time with Makulu. The bond they created lasted until their final days. Rasta and Pretty Boy were little mates, and they were called the twins. Scar or Dreadlocks was just a couple of months younger and grew up with them. The youngest Mr. T and Kinky Tail were only born when their 3 older cousins were already subadults, and due to the age difference, their mothers chose to raise them apart from the pride. Mr. T and Kinky Tail were inseparable, and they too bonded for life. Some even speculated the Split Rock males were the fathers, but the West Street males acknowledged them as their offspring. After the last West Street male had died, the Sparta Pride reunited. By then Mr. T and Kinky Tail were subadults as well, and they met their older cousins. By the time Makulu was 6 years old and entered his prime when the last West Street males died. The West Street males left a huge territory behind, and none of the other coalitions took over their long-dominated land. That's why the young Mapojas had absolutely no reason to leave their mother's land. But every now and then they were confronted by the neighboring coalitions who put them in their place. The Split Rock males laid eyes on the spot of pride, but Makulu took the 5 young Mapojas under his wing and prevented a takeover. He becomes the leader of the Mapojas. Even on the age, they were a formidable force of 6, and they constituted a large obstacle for the aging Split Rock males. Makulu, a lion born to be a leader, and it was his strategy to build their confidence and strength to turn them into formidable hunters and killers. Under the smart leadership of Makulu, they learned to bring down big prey like buffalo, rhino, hippo, and even giraffe. Makulu usually initiated the hunt, but the 2 youngest were always in the middle of the actions. Over time, their successful hunting strategy paid off big time, and they grew into big, strong, and confident lions. In February 2006, they finally left their mother's land to conquer their own territory. They moved up north and invaded the territory of Majingilane, who controlled the Sparta Pride. The other lionesses had many cubs of different ages, and they had a lot to lose. In June 2006, Mapogo made his move, this time without his brothers. Fight itself had not been witnessed, but you could tell what was going on by just listening to the noise they made after the brutal fight they saw. Majingilane again in company of the Sparta Pride, but just a couple of days later he disappeared, never to be seen again. It is highly unlikely for young lions to find a territory that is not controlled by other lions. The only way to get a meritorious to take it by force. Following 1.5 years, the 6 Mapojas took one territory after another. By the end of 2007, there was only one dominant male left who did not declare defeat. The other 12 males, who dominated Sabi sand before the Mapogo came, were either chased out, killed or died of other reasons. The Mapojas seemed invincible. But there were cracks in the armor. They fought really hard about mating rights, and that created tension amongst them. The youngest Mr. T and Kinky Tail were the last in the pecking order, and they just had enough. They wanted their own pride's lionesses to mate with and to sire their own cubs. Mapogo, as the leader, had the first mating rights, and the others had to wait to get their turn. By 2007, the two youngest Mr. T and Kinky Tail tested the borders and moved up north and east. At first, they were still seen in company of their 3 older cousins, but they eventually returned west and joined up with Mapogo. Mr. T and Kinky Tail were left behind. They took over the Sparta Pride, and they managed to split up the Styx Pride that was under the control of the roller coaster male. They even made a move to dominate their natal pride, and stripped the roller coaster male of 2 more Sparta lionesses. For more than 2 years, they were the sole protectors of the Mapogo territory. They not only defended their land but their brothers as well against every single intruder who entered from the north, east and south. Compared to Kinky Tail and Mr. T, their brothers in the west had a relatively easy life. Every intruder who wanted to get to the west had to go through Mr. T and Kinky Tail first. The next 2 years were relatively calm in Sabi sand, until the 5 young males trespassed from the north. They were young, inexperienced, and they were looking for a territory to take. At first, they kept a low profile to figure out how many males they were up against. In mid-2010, they made their first move. They started to scent mark and they announced their presence. Mr. T and Kinky Tail responded. They immediately accepted the challenge and moved up north to confront the trespassers. Until this point, Mr. T and Kinky Tail had never lost a fight before, even when they had been outnumbered like against the 3-2 to lone males. They managed to chase them out. In the morning hours of June 8, 2010, Mr. T and Kinky Tail followed a trail of a young Majingilane, who somehow got separated from his brothers and was hiding under a bush. As he watched the Mapojas closing in on him, he suddenly panicked and starts running away from the brothers. But he was not that lucky. Only a couple of seconds later, the 2 Mapogo brothers were onto him and knocked him to the ground. The outcome from this fight was predictable. Mr. T and Kinky Tail grabbed and pinned him to the ground. It was a ferocious attack, and the battle sounds could be heard from all over the reserve as they attacked his legs, groin and shattered his pelvis. The young Majingilane gave it his all, but sadly he never stood a chance against such a dominant force. However, he did manage to slightly injure both Mr. T and Kinky Tail before he finally succumbed to his battle wounds. The 2 Mapojas decided to call it a day. They went to rest and licked their wounds. Rest of the day, Mr. T and Kinky Tail were seen nursing their injuries. But this was not the final chapter, because after dark, the reaming Majingilane returned for the vengeance. A little while later, all hell broke loose. They managed to isolate Kinky Tail, who was probably lagging behind due to his injury. During the encounter, without the experience of being afraid of anything, Kinky Tail attacked all four of them by himself. Loud roars and growls filled the air. Kinky Tail, on the other hand, the war machine of the Mapojas, who had absolutely no concept of fear, stood his ground and even went to attack them. Heavily outnumbered, overpowered him and knocked him off his feet. The sounds of immense power filled the African skies. It cuts like a knife through your body. One of the Majingilane lion was biting at his neck, another at his back, and the third bit off Kinky Tail's testicles and genitalia. The angry Majingilanes managed to successfully snap Kinky Tail's spine. This gunshot-like sound is the Kinky Tail's spine being broken. Following the noise of the fight, Mr. T arrived at the scene to help out his brother, but it was already too late. For a moment, the attackers shifted their focus to Mr. T, and now he had to fight for his own life. Mr. T still attempted to take on a few Majingilanes, but ultimately he was forced to flee for his own life. The four Majingilanes chased Mr. T for a while, but luckily he managed to get away. After this, the Majingilanes came back to finally finish off Kinky Tail. He was practically eaten alive. The Majingilanes proceeded to roar and advertise themselves as the new rulers of the area. The next day, Mr. T was in Mala, calling out for his brother. His roars were shaking the African bush. After the tragic death of Kinky Tail, Mr. T did not go to the west immediately, as some people believe. Mr. T stayed around Juma for one more day and then he moved south to Mala. But in June 10, 2010, he went back to Juma to look for Kinky Tail. He visited the exact spot where Kinky Tail was killed. Then he moved again back to Mala to protect the sticks and the Sparta Pride. Again he had a brief fight with the four Majingilane but managed to escape. Then he went to protect the Sparta Pride. This time the fight was more fearsome. He stayed longer, he fought, he got injured and then he escaped again. The Majingilanes were chasing him all the way to the west of Londolozi until June 29. Mr. T stayed in the east trying to save his pride for about 3 weeks. Mr. T not only lost Kinky Tail that night, but his long-dominated and much-loved territory was taken too. After 2 more incidents with Majingilanes, he finally gave up and crossed the Sand River to join up with his remaining brothers in the west. His brothers accepted him back, and just a couple of days later he returned with them to the east to get back what he has lost. Everyone was waiting for a big showdown, but this never happened. It's questionable if the two coalitions met at all, but it's documented that after dark, they got into a roaring match. The next day they were back in the west sector and had been seen in Singida area. Shortly after, the twins Rasta and Pretty Boy decided to go back to the east sector alone, and 2 weeks later the Mapojas had lost another brother. Pretty Boy returned alone, injured by a fight with other lions. Some say Rasta got killed by the Majingilane, but until this day there is still a lot of doubts. There are strong beliefs that he got poached. Mr. T's return created chaos amongst the prides in the west sector. While he was in the east, his brothers had sired many cubs with the Zimungwi pride. But Mr. T didn't accept the cubs, and it took him only a couple of weeks to find all of them, and he started killing and was seen even eating them. This extraordinary behavior earned him the nickname Satan. Infanticide, the killing of young cubs, is quite common among lions when new males take over a territory, because as mentioned, it puts an end to the weaker male's lineage. Cannibalism, however, is not common among lions. There are a number of recorded instances of the Mapojas brutally killing other lions and then eating them. This occurred with both adult lions and cubs. One of the biggest contributors to the Mapojas' violent reputation is their cannibalistic tendencies. Though Mr. T and Makulu seem to be best buddies, but while Mr. T was killing his brother's cubs, his brothers did nothing to stop his vicious behaviors. Till now, everything was well. The Mapojas had a firm grip on the west sector. The Zimungwi lionesses were ready to mate again, and then dreadlocks disappeared without a trace. 2010 turned out to be the worst year for the Mapojas. In less than 6 months the Mapojas had lost 3 of their brothers. There are many theories flying around what happened to him. One of them is that he also fell of the victim to poachers. Even though their numbers were dwindling down, the Mapojas were still the kings of the West. In 2011, they defended their territory against 5 Saladi males and 3 of the Matimba brothers. However, 2 of them were already past their prime, and it was only a question of time until the next intruder would challenge them. But the Saladis didn't give up, and at the beginning of 2012 they went in for another try. 4 of them returned after they had lost a brother in a fight with the Majingilane. They started to scent marks, and they even dared to mate with one of the Zimungwi lionesses who had lost her cubs to a leopard. In the end of February 2012, they attacked Pretty Boy and mauled him badly. He only survived because his brothers Makulu and Mr. T arrived on time. They chased off the Saladas one by one and rescued Pretty Boy, the phoenix of the Mapojas, a warrior spirit, who was always able to survive with multiple deep wounds. Even though Pretty Boy was badly injured, Mr. T was not ready to give up his territory just yet. March 16, 2012. The Mapojas having their last buffalo meals as the ruling males approaching by the west. Makulu, Pretty Boy and Mr. T took down a huge Daga boy, and the Sparta males were busy eating. But the Saladas are now planning to attack again, and they were confident enough to defeat the old Spartan warriors. Without any fear, the 4 Saladi males moved deep into the Mapoho territory, with only one goal: to eliminate the old emperors of Sabi sand. In the morning hours of March 16, 2012, the 2 coalitions moved continuously towards each other with the intent to clear the air once and for all. It didn't take them long until they met. No one had expected what is going to happen next. Mr. T confronted the Saladis by himself and gave Makulu and Pretty Boy the chance to get away, unharmed. This was the last fight of Mr. T. A fight of honor. Mr. T Mapoho lived by the sword, and he died by the sword, just like his brother Kinky Tail. Makulu and Pretty Boy knew that they had lost Mr. T. They moved east and they faced an unfriendly welcome by the Majingalanes. Makulu changed his plan and they started to move south and they invaded the territory of the two Kruger males, Freddie and Limper. In April 2012 they challenged the two Kruger males, but the confrontation was more like chasing each other around and engaging in a roaring match. In July, Makulu and Limper came face to face and Limper got badly injured in the process. Makulu, who was already 14 years old at the time, left the area as a champion, but the victory didn't bring the expected outcome. Pretty Boy had lost a lot of condition and as results, they both moved into Kruger. They returned to Sabi Sands in November and the last time they were seen together was on Mondolozi, feeding on a huge buffalo kill. Just a couple of weeks later, Age cashed up with Pretty Boy and he found his final resting place. Over the years, Pretty Boy had always been Makulu's closest companion and they stayed together until the bitter end. Makulu was last seen on January 2013 in Malamala, in the land he was born into. Even though the Mapojo controlled 9 prides and sired a lot of cubs, there were not many who reached adulthood. But some of their offspring did. 2 males and 7 females. Their sons were born into the Ottawa Pride, left Sabi Sand by the end of 2011 and moved into Kruger. Provably they took over some lion prides and sired more cubs with them. For the daughters of Mr. T and Kinky Tail, who were born into the Tsalala Pride, passed their genes onto the biggest lion pride currently living in Sabi Sands, the Cannibalism Pride. The 3 lionesses sired by Makulu, Rasta, Pretty Boy and Scar, raised 3 generations of cubs. The 2 youngest are just under 2 years old, and they are fighting for the survival of the Ottawa Pride. The 6 Cannibalism lionesses are the granddaughters of Mr. T and Kinky Tail. They raised 5 males and 6 females to adulthood. Even though they are the biggest lion pride in Sabi Sand, the total number of adult lionesses is concerning. It dropped down to 32 this year. Remarkably, 19 of them carry the bloodline of the Mapojas. During the decade-long reign of the Mapojas, it is estimated that they have killed more than 100 other lions. Their story is one of violence, deception, and thirst for power, one which reveals a surprisingly sophisticated side to the politics of lion behavior. Notorious, infamous, legendary, brutal, these are all words commonly used to describe the Mapojo lions of the Sabi Sand. Love them or hate them, their exploits will never be forgotten. These tales will no doubt be embellished and exaggerated, but this is how great icons are born. Over time, these stories will become myths and myths will become legends. A fitting legacy for the most famous lions of the modern era.